Welcome, everyone. I am so delighted to see most of you and to know that the rest of you are with us tonight from various places all over the globe. My name is Christy Morrow-Wolf, and I am an assistant to Bishop Price here in the Eastern Synod, and I am so delighted to be with you tonight and that we could be all together. As you just heard, Adam hit record, so this session is being recorded, and this is for our friends who couldn't join us tonight. I believe it will be available for viewing at a later date on the Eastern Synod website and also on the Youth and Young Adult Ministry website. So if you know of other folks that you would like to share this with, please do. It's going to be a great evening this evening. I would also like to acknowledge that I come to you today on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat and the Neutrals. And I wish to honor the ancestral guardians of this land and its waterways. Today, many Indigenous people continue to call this land home and act as its stewards. And this responsibility extends to all peoples to share and care for this land for generations to come. What I would like to do is just do a few housekeeping things, and part of that is just to outline the evening and how the flow is kind of going to happen today. I'm going to do some brief introductions, and then Katarina is going to lead us in a Jamboard exercise, which is sort of an interactive way to participate online, and she's got some really good questions to get us thinking about the land that we are privileged to co-inhabit with others. Kata will then have her presentation, and then we'll do some question and answers. And then I have a brief sending in prayer to send us off this evening. So as far as introductions go, I believe Bishop Michael is with us. He wants to pop on and just say hello for a second.
Hi, everybody. It's so good to be with you. And I just want to say thank you very much, Katarina. I'm so appreciative of the leadership that you're going to provide to us tonight and the leadership that youth and young adults are providing in the life of our church. We desperately need your leadership, and we're grateful for the opportunity to be with you here tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Bishop. And I'm not sure, Bishop Susan I haven't seen her come in yet. Okay, so we'll watch for her and check in with her when she arrives as well. It is my great pleasure tonight to also introduce to you Katarina Kuhnert. Kata is an early career circumpolar climate scientist who represented the Lutheran World Federation at the 2021 COP26 in Glasgow, Scotland, and was previously a delegate at the 2015 pre-COP 21 Future of Life in the Arctic events in Storforsen, Sweden. She is a non-Indigenous Canadian living north of the Arctic Circle in Inuvik, Northwest Territories on Inuvik, I knew I was going to mess this one up, Inuvialuit Gwich'in in the Northern Métis lands. She has worked to model sea level and ecosystems change, monitor permafrost environments, promote anti-colonial approaches to conservation, and support circumpolar youth in land-based learning. Kata, welcome, and thank you for being with us tonight. I am so excited for your time and your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Christy. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the opportunity to chat with you all tonight. And it's nice because there's so much good friends and family. It's nice in the church. We just all know each other already. And maybe there's a couple I don't know, but we'll get to know each other, I'm sure. To start off tonight, as Christy mentioned, we're going to do this Jamboard activity, get some of your thoughts out there as well, hopefully be a little interactive, and don't be shy to share your thoughts. So I'll put the link in the chat. So everyone should have access to the link now. When you click it, what it should do is pull up, oop, I lost my light here, pull up a little Google file. And the first question you should see is, what does the environment look like where you live? And then when you pull up that tab, what you're going to see in the center of the screen at the top is something that says like 1/4. And it's not 1/4, it's not a quarter cup, it's page 1 of 4. And if you click over to the right, there's going to be a couple more questions. So questions to get us started today. What does the environment look like where you live? Why is the environment important to you and your community? What impacts of climate change have you noticed in your environment? And so you can answer on the Jamboard. The way that I would want to do that is when I look on the left, there's a little sticky note. It looks like a little square with a couple lines of text inside. I would just click right on that and then type your answer in the chat. Another way, if this is just a little bit too much tech, in the chat of the Zoom, if that's something you're more comfortable with, you could put your answers there. So whatever you're comfortable with, we're just looking for a little bit of information. What does the land look like where you live? What does the environment look like? Why is it important to you? And have you noticed any changes in your environment? Have you noticed any challenge on the land? So you can feel free to put in the Jamboard or in the chat. Or if some people, neither way is really working for you, you could raise your hand in the Zoom and unmute and you could tell us yourself. All right, I see some good answers coming in. So maybe what I'll do is I'll share my screen. We can take a look at them. Okay, can you guys see my screen? Try and make this full screen here. Can someone give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen? Nice. All right, thanks, Bishop Mike. Okay, so what does the environment look like where you live? We've got prairies with rivers, trees, snow, lots of snow, a whole lot of snow. We got Great Lakes. We got new developments, fields, grass, and trees. Some people got very cold and snowy, being nervous. Even sometimes being nervous when there's not snow at the right times of year. Yeah, that's something that we're seeing here in Inuvik. We're having much more snow than it's expected. Different grasses, animals, the Grand River. Okay, so you got some people in the Waterloo region. We got some weather below -15 degrees. That's happening later in the year. So changes in the seasons. Super interesting. Thanks for all your answers. Let's see if we get any answers on the second page. All right, a couple answers on the second page. Love to see it. Why is the environment important? Because it provides food, water, shelter, protection, beauty, because life is important, supporting all living beings, food, drinking water, recreation, a cycle of life. And then have we noticed some changes? Some people have noticed flooding, fewer animals, greater extremes in temperatures, especially in the winter, intensifying weather, seasons coming later than 20 years ago. That's a really interesting observation. Swings in temperatures, hotter summers, dirty rivers, lots of extreme temperatures. I think that's something that we're really noticing, a lot of us today, is the extreme weather, the extreme temperatures, more snow, different weather, things hitting at different times. These are all really good observations. You guys are being really good climate scientists, giving me a run for my money here. Well, thank you so much for all of your contributions. Maybe we'll leave the Jamboard there, but feel free to share your thoughts there. If anything comes up for you during the presentation, you can do it now, you can do it at another time. I'll just leave that link there so it's available to you. And we're going to come back another time. And we're going to do another Jamboard later. So all the skills you learn about putting your Post-its in the chat, we're going to do that again. Some of you noticed that there was a fourth slide. I'm saving it for later. We're going to come in at another second here. So we're going to get started. I'll share my screen again. This is a different presentation. So let's give that a go. If you'll give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen. Nice. Well, look at us. Tech 2 for 2. Are we geniuses at tech here in the Lutheran Church? I think so. Really brushed up our skills over this COVID times. So we're going to be talking today about finding your voice in climate action, especially for youth. I think I noticed a couple of youth on the call, some of whom are related to me, some of whom are not. So this is nice. And while I just wanted to say, as we're getting started here, that climate issues aren't just a youth issue. Climate justice issues are an intergenerational issue. That means that they affect lots of people at all stages of life, all of us who are living on this earth, and also the generations to come. And it's also an intersectional issue, which means that it impacts different sectors of our lives. And so the solutions to climate change issues have to be as diverse as the problems, and the people resolving these issues are as diverse as the problems are. So although this presentation is aiming towards youth, thank you for coming in from any age. And if you are interested to hear a little bit more formal reporting about the COP, there is another event happening in February with the National Church. I believe it'll be on February 19. That's with myself, Erica Rodning, and Jeff Boosie, talking about the last couple of COPs that different ELCIC reps have attended. So more to come. And then also for today, I just wanted to say that I couldn't have had these thoughts that I'll share with you in this presentation without the LWF team that was a part of our delegation to COP26. So I just wanted to credit Elena, Savannah, Rebecca, Nora, and Nathan. Nathan is here with us today for all of their brilliant ideas, all of the things that they were willing to share during the process of working and learning together over the past couple of months. So we're doing this together. I'm not doing it by myself. So just wanted to let you know about them as well, and you'll see pictures of them later. All right, so like to get started by a little bit about me. So this is my family. So we're talking today about finding our voice in the climate movement. And I found my voice in the climate movement because of my family. This is a picture of us outside. Ever since I was a little kid, I knew that I was passionate about the environment. It was something I cared about. It was important to me. And they always created opportunities for us to be outside, for us to be in nature together, and also supported me in finding my place in this movement. There was a time in my life where I looked around at the world and I was like, you know what, I guess I got to look at some other environments somewhere else in the world to learn about climate change. I should look at the Amazon rainforest, or I should look at Antarctica. And my family said, well, why don't you look at environments where we actually live? Why don't you look at the stuff where it's the land under our feet? It's the places where our family's from. It's where we live. It's what we care about. It's what we love. It's where our hearts are. And that's why I had us chat today first about what the land looks like where we live, because climate change is unfortunately impacting us at home. We don't have to go somewhere else to look for the impacts of climate change. We're seeing it today. We're seeing it right now. All of you are noticing it. That's what you put on the Jamboard. And so one of the places my family encouraged me to look for is right here in the Northwest Territories. So I'm calling in today from Nunavik Northwest Territories, which is in the Western Arctic. That's where I was born. That's where I currently live and work. And it's the land that brings me joy. It's the land that nourishes me and supports me. It's the land under my feet right now. And it's my privilege to work here. But also the work can be challenging for those of us who are young, for those of us who are a bit older. When we're talking about justice issues, these things can weigh heavy on our hearts. And the way that we work through that heaviness is with love, it's with joy. And this is the land that brings me that joy. This is the land that I love. So when we think about things like climate grief, or when we think about working through this pandemic time when things can be really hard, and it can be really hard to think about talking about climate change in the midst of the ongoing grief that we're dealing with the pandemic, it's important to go back to those things that ground us, important to go back to those things that that remind us of the foundation of love that's at the base of these challenges that we're facing. So I work, or I have been working as a GIS technician, which is a geographic information science technician. I'm a professionally licensed drone pilot. What I do is I fly a tool that's called a remotely piloted aircraft system. It's basically a little tiny little plane with no people on it that I fly up in the air, and it takes pictures over the land. And then we turn those pictures into a map. And then when we take those maps year after year, we can see how the land is changing over time. And one of the things that we have in this landscape is that we have permafrost, which means that inside the ground, there is a layer of ice in the ground. And something that we're seeing as we notice temperatures warming is that the ice that's in the ground is thawing. And that's causing our land to fall. It's causing our land to shift as we're walking under our feet. And so something that we do is we put in temperature sensors into the ground to see how stable that permafrost is, to see how stable the ice in the ground is, to know if our buildings are going to be safe or if our buildings are going to be at risk of being damaged and hurting us. So that's what I'm doing in the bottom corner. And I did see that there was a question in the chat, is it winter all of the time where I live? And it's not. It gets up to very warm temperatures in the summertime. I like to swim. I like to paddle my kayak. I like to pick berries. We got nice trees. And we do have some beautiful winters as well. So that's a little bit about me. We'll go on here to what is COP? We've been using this acronym. It was in the advertisement for this event, but what does that mean? We can start by talking about what is climate change, because that's the reason why the COP exists. So to talk about climate change, we have to talk about greenhouse gases. So our planet has these really nice gases around it. That's the reason why we can live on this earth, is because we have this nice atmosphere. Atmosphere is just the mix of all of the gases that surrounds the earth, that holds the heat from the sun and makes it so that the earth is a nice livable temperature. If we didn't have this nice atmosphere full of greenhouse gases, it would be too cold for us. It would be Mars. We'd have to wear spacesuits all the time. That would be a problem. Doesn't suit my coloring. It's not the fashion for me. So we like the atmosphere. The atmosphere is full of natural greenhouse gases. But something that we've noticed over the past couple hundred years is that since the Industrial Revolution, we've been adding too much artificial greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And how we've been doing that is by burning fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are things like coal, oil, natural gas. We dig them out of the ground, we burn them, we use them to power our cars, to heat our homes. And then the byproduct is these greenhouse gases, things like carbon dioxide and methane, that goes into the atmosphere, and it causes all that heat from the sun to bounce around a lot and make it warmer and warmer. So we've taken this natural effect and we've intensified it through our actions. Our human actions, how we're living, is impacting the earth, and it's having consequences that affect how we live. Things like more natural disasters, sea level rise, more extreme weather. So this is a problem. And we've noticed as an international community that this has become a problem. And in 1992, the United Nations, which is just an international platform where different governments from around the world get together to talk to each other about issues that affect everyone around the world. Well, in 1992, they got together to talk about climate change, and they created the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which was basically an international treaty, an international agreement that said that they would come together to talk about how climate change was impacting people and what were they going to do about it. And so then they started having these meetings under the treaty, which they called the Conference of the Parties, COP. That's COP for short. So really what that means is just it's the Conference of the Parties who signed on to the treaty, which was the Framework Convention on Climate Change. And in 2015, the group of countries that were involved with this international agreement on climate change created a document called the Paris Agreement. And what they said in 2015 was, look, we're really causing a lot of warming. We're actually increasing the temperature of the whole planet. And we think by 2100, we could hit like we could increase the temperature of the planet by multiple degrees. So you know what we have to do to prevent the most devastating impacts of climate change? We're going to have to limit the warming to below 2 degrees Celsius. That's what they all agreed. We have to reduce our emissions of greenhouse gases to keep global warming below 2 degrees Celsius. And they put on the table, you know, it would probably be a bit better if we kept it under 1.5 degrees. But right now we can say 2. We're going to talk about 2 degrees. And so they made a number of agreements. And part of what they said was, you know, if we're going to make these plans to reduce our emissions, each country is going to have to decide how they're going to do that. So everybody go back to your country, go and decide how you're going to reduce your emissions in your country. And then let's come back together in 2020 with our plans, which we're going to call nationally determined contributions. And then we'll review our plans and then we'll decide how to move forward from there. But then in 2020, we didn't have a COP because there was COVID, so there was no international travel. So there was a lot of pressure on the meetings in 2021 where we were going to have to assess those plans and see if we were going to be on track to keep our goals from the Paris Agreement. So I had a little bit of involvement in work leading up to the Paris Agreement, a little bit. I was 18 and I had the opportunity to travel with Bishop Susan and with my mom, Pastor Katarina Kuhnert, to Storfors in Sweden, like Christine mentioned. And we were working on some documents that were made available before COP21. And some of the main things that people were talking about in this conference was, how is climate change impacting international circumpolar people who live in the north, people who live above the Arctic Circle. And I think even Bishop Susan might have joined the chat now. So maybe she'd like to say something now, or not to put you on the spot. Maybe we could bring it up a little bit later. I don't know, Christy, what would you like to do?
Sure. Welcome, Bishop Susan.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. That was an amazing conference. It involved people from Russia and Finland, Norway, Sweden, Canada, and the United States, specifically Alaska. So all around the Arctic Circle. And it was there for the first time. I heard the phrase that has stuck with me about the right to be cold. About how things are warming up in the Arctic and really changing life for people, endangering livelihoods, traditional lifestyles, and certainly animals. Like we hear a lot about polar bears, but it's not just the polar bears. So there were some wonderful people there, theologians, practitioners, Indigenous people from Canada, Sami people from the Scandinavian countries. And one of the ones I would want to point out right in the front in the white shirt, Chief Wilton Littlechild, who is one of the commissioners for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So good to look at the question of climate change theologically and experientially in together with these people all around the north. And Kata was a great participant.
Well, when we talk about supportive adults, which is one of the things that I was asked to speak to on this call, was not only how can youth find their voices in climate movements, but how can adults support youth? This was really an amazing experience for me to get involved with these kind of big topics, big issues, and to feel supported in my church too, because not only did I have the chance to go with Bishop Susan, but then Bishop Susan helped me to participate, and that had a big impact on me for trying to come back and keep doing work within the climate sphere in the north. So, and Yaya helped sponsor me to go. So all of the different ways that adults can support youth in getting involved in some of these issues. So thanks for sharing a bit, Bishop Susan.
Thank you.
Bishop Susan mentioned that that's Chief Wilton Littlechild in the front, and specifically he also brought the idea of the Make It Operative campaign to the group, which was the idea that the perspectives of Indigenous peoples, women, elders, and children need to be uplifted within the text of the Paris Agreement, both because these people have intersecting vulnerabilities when it comes to living on the front lines of climate change, but also that they have essential knowledges that are important to bring into the conversation when you're talking about addressing climate change or resilience in the face of climate change. So that's some of the work from back in 2015. And where does the LWF come into all of this? So the Lutheran World Federation is a coalition of 148 Lutheran churches in 99 countries, representing 77 million Lutherans. So that's a lot of Lutherans. That's a lot of Lutherans. There are brothers and sisters in faith, people all around the world who share our beliefs and who are also motivated by their faith to do good works in the world, but also people all around the world who are having different experiences of climate change. And so as part of a global community as Lutherans, we not only have the responsibility when we think about issues like climate change to think about how it's impacting us, but also how it's impacting our friends, our neighbors, our brothers and sisters all around the world. And one of the ways that we can use that information to respond is through the Lutheran World Federation. And the LWF has as its mission to work for a just, peaceful, and reconciled world. Through God's grace, we're called to uplift different core values of dignity and justice and compassion and diversity and inclusion and transparency. And so when the LWF has been working on climate change issues, for this COP, they highlighted 5 main goals. So these are the 5 calls to action, 5 things that we as Lutherans communicated through the Lutheran World Federation to the international community that we were hoping to see in these climate negotiations. So we were hoping to see an accelerated and ambitious commitment to emissions reductions to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And if you remember, the conversation from the Paris Agreement was, let's say 2, 1.5 would be good, but let's say 2. So the LWF is calling us to be ambitious towards 1.5 degrees to prevent the most devastating effects of climate change, the most devastating effects on the land, but also on the people who live with those consequences of climate change. The second thing was that when we look at how to address issues of climate change, some countries have more resources than others. And so the LWF is calling for those countries that have more resources to provide climate finances, money and resources to support vulnerable communities and countries that have less. That's a principle of global equity. The other thing, the third thing is that we want to support adaptation action in vulnerable communities. That means adapting to climate change, even as we're working to prevent the impacts, because we know that we're already seeing impacts of climate change, and increasing our ability to adapt increases our resiliency in the face of challenge and change. So if you're noticing that your sea level is rising because of climate change, an adaptation would be to build a seawall or to sandbag your coastline. Those are ways that we can adapt. Because if we don't adapt, then what we end up with is loss and damage. And the fourth thing that the LWF is calling us to do is to avert, minimize, and address loss and damage. So if we don't have the chance to reinforce our coastlines against flooding, the loss we might see could be flooding, damaging buildings and infrastructure, or a loss of life. And we want to reduce that as much as possible. And the fifth thing from the LWF is we want to support youth-led action and intergenerational justice. And one of the ways that the LWF does this is by sending youth as their delegates to COP. And they have been doing this since 2011. So that's about 10 years that they've been sending youth as their primary delegation. And what does that look like? Well, it looks pretty cute. It looks like a group of young people from different countries around in the world who bring different skills and talents and knowledges and experiences to the table. You can see our in-person delegation in the bottom corner. That's Natin from Brazil, Becky from Singapore, myself from Canada, and Nora from Norway. It also looks like accompanying youth. So in the middle picture, there's the three of us, but also joined by Savannah Sullivan, the program executive for youth from the LWF, and Elena Cedillo, who is the climate justice executive for the LWF, who accompanied us at COP and helped support us to do a good job of representing our communities. And you can also see that we were accompanied by an online delegation. So 4 of us could go in person, but there were also 28 youth who followed online from all over the world. And we didn't participate in the same way. We brought all of these different skills and experiences, and that made us stronger as a group. We can talk as well about some ways that other youth can get involved, because throughout the course of this, throughout the course of our participation in the COP, different youth were doing different things. We made TikToks, we made Instagram posts, we hosted online talks, and I'll talk a little bit later about some of the things that I did myself. So, but this is our crew, and we were faithfully participating as members of the Lutheran Church. And there were lots of other young people there who were also participating from a faithful perspective. So in the top picture here, you can see a group of interdenominational Christian youth who are meeting to have lunch, have dinner together, get to know each other, chat about our experience at the COP. We also had haggis, which was delicious, I thought, but I have Scottish ancestry, so maybe it's just me. And also in the bottom, you can see a meeting from the Interfaith Liaison Committee. And this was a group of interfaith actors. So it turns out that in the world, about 80% of the global population subscribes to some faith tradition. So not necessarily Christianity, although a lot of people are Christian, but also Judaism and Islam and Buddhism and Hinduism, all of these different kinds of faiths that, although they don't have all the same practices, work to call us into a better relationship with the land and with each other. And so at these international conferences, there was the opportunity for people from different faiths to get together to talk about how faith calls all of us as faithful people to act with the issue of climate change, and what we as a collective could communicate to governmental organizations about engaging with this issue. Okay, so now we're going to go to that secret 4th slide that some of you noticed on the Jamboard. So we're going to talk about how our faith calls us to act in terms of climate justice issues. And some of us might have already commented, and otherwise we can go back to that same slide here. So just checking if you guys can still see my screen here. Can someone give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen? Nice. Okay. So feel free to add on more thoughts if you have some thoughts, but wondering how your faith calls you to act in terms of climate justice issues. So people have answered insisting on movement, deconstructing, decolonizing, loving God by loving creation, walking gently, loving vulnerable people. Including refugees, thinking specifically of climate refugees. We're being called to be stewards of God's good creation, knowing that that's the work of God's loving hands to make creation. God's calling us to be in relationship with creation. So not just stewarding creation, but having reciprocal relationships with creation, working and learning together, loving the earth together, being prophets and advocates for creation. These are amazing answers. And I agree with you, and you're teaching me good stuff here too. Having humility, building relationships with people. These are all ways that our faith calls us to act and walk with the land and waters around us, being good neighbors, to all peoples, extending that care to the land and the water, following Indigenous leadership, which we will talk about a little bit as well, loving God, each other, and the world around us, thinking about how God says, like that loving your neighbor is loving God, washing each other's feet, right? You guys are really smart. This is great. I'm really enjoying this. Listening to the voice of the earth. I don't think I'd seen that one yet. I don't know if anyone, if I missed any, please forgive me, but do take the time to check that out on when you have a second. Oh, I got one more here. Holistic and honoring interconnectedness. I think that's really helpful when we think about working within an international context as well, is thinking about how does the actions of my country impact how you're living in your country. This was something that I was thinking about as a member of the LWF delegation. Is I had the chance to be there in person and some of my colleagues didn't. So how do I bring their voices to the table? The earth does not belong to us, but we belong to God. That is also a beautiful thing to bring. Opting to uphold Indigenous agency, not speaking for other people, not making choices for them, but allowing them to self-determine, to self-govern, praying for God and seeing the planet that He made. Yeah, I think these are all really great answers and different ways that we can walk in our faith within a climate movement. So I'll bring us back over to this presentation. Thank you all for sharing in the Jamboard. I'm amazed at our how good the tech's been working out so far. Can you see this slide on COP26? Can you give me a little thumbs up if you can see? Okay, so like I mentioned before, COP26 was meant to be about finalizing the rules of the Paris Agreement, coming forward with those nationally determined contributions, making a plan. So what did that look like? Well, it looked like almost 40,000 people descending on Glasgow, Scotland, and hosting an event at what's called the Scottish Events Centre, which is, if you can imagine, a big Olympic arena, a really big concert venue, a really big sports arena. This second picture you can see here with the globe in it is one part of the venue, and you can see that it's separated into lots of different sections. There's a presentation happening in one spot. There's meetings happening in the middle. There's camera crews and media broadcasts happening at the same time. And this is only one of many venues at the site. And what happens in these meetings is everything from public servants sitting and discussing the nitty-gritty of the text, to this big room where ministers of environment from all over the world would sit and look at each other in the face and talk about what they want to see from the agreement. And you can see on the screen, that's COP President Alok Sharma, who is the moderator of the discussions. People talk into these little microphones, and the president would make sure that people are speaking respectfully, acknowledging the time, are addressing the issue at hand, helping to guide and direct the conversation. But COP doesn't just look like the formal processes, the government processes, it also looks like resistance to the formal processes. So some of the ways that this happens is through demonstrations. We call them stunts. They're meant to challenge and change the process of the COP. And this year we had the first LWF youth-led stunt, which we collaborated on around the idea of creation, not for sale. And that's the idea, was that we don't want to sell out creation in the future for a quick buck today. Don't sell out our futures, and don't sell out the land. And part of the reason we organized that stunt was in recognition that the largest singular delegation at COP26 was of fossil fuel lobbyists. There were over 500 fossil fuel lobbyists in attendance. It outnumbered any country delegation, even Brazil, which was the largest country delegation. And even some countries like Canada sent fossil fuel lobbyists as part of their official country delegation. So that caused a lot of conflict within the session, because it meant that there were more fossil fuel lobbyists than Indigenous peoples, like global Indigenous peoples at the conference. And speaking of resisting the process, there was even a walkout that was organized under the leadership of Indigenous delegates at the conference, where they left one day because the countries were not being ambitious enough to respect people living on the front lines of the climate crisis. And it's important for us to remember that Indigenous people represent 5% of the global population and protect 80% of the planet's biodiversity. So they are some of the most important and most knowledgeable climate leaders in our global community, and are often not reflected in the governance of the countries that they live within or that are occupying their land. So in the midst of all of that, how do you use your gifts in a context where there's 40,000 people and it's very easy to get lost in the venue? One of the ways that I did this for myself was I reflected on what could I bring to the table? What did I have to share? And I looked to things that I had already been doing and communities that I was already a part of. So youth in my region of the Western Arctic had already written a statement about climate change and how it was impacting us, noting that climate change is an overwhelming subject and it's hard to fight the lack of hope, but we will work towards our goals even if they won't be achieved in our lifetime, because we are resilient in the face of the challenges that we encounter. So I brought that statement with me. I also brought these cute cards from children at the elementary school that my sister was working at, where they had been asked by their teachers what they thought about climate change and what they wanted to see from their leaders. And they said everything from, I don't want the ocean to be full of garbage, or I want to know that the penguins are safe, to we have to take care of each other. So I brought those knowledges from the youth around me and I presented them to politicians when I had the chance to meet them. That's Green MP Elizabeth May and another Green MP Mike Morris, who actually took those youth statements and presented them to the Minister of Environment for Canada, Stephen Guilbeault, and brought them to his table as he's been making these decisions for our country. Another way that I tried to use my gifts was that the LWF created opportunities for us as youth delegates, not just to learn and listen, but also to share our thoughts. They created opportunities for us to speak on panels, and I got to speak on this panel on energy transitions, talking about in Canada, where a lot of our economy is based on extraction, transitioning to a just green economy would have to reject colonial patterns that have caused the climate crisis in the first place. And actually, some of the leadership from the Northwest Territories came to attend my talk. That's Minister of Environment for the Northwest Territories, Shane Thompson, and Member of Legislative Assembly, Katarina Kuhnert, who came to attend my talk. So that's another way that supportive adults can make space for youth, is to give us opportunities to share our thoughts as well as to grow and develop as young leaders. And what was the result of the conference? Well, two major things that happened at this conference were that commitments were made to keep 1.5 in the conversation. So remember in the Paris Agreement where it's, oh, it's maybe like, let's go for 2, like maybe 1.5 is important, but let's go for 2. There were recommitments to creating the target goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And for the first time, it was highlighted that to do so, we would need to phase out, or at the very least phase down, the use of fossil fuels. And the president of the COP, Alok Sharma, said to us at the end of the conference, he said, we've kept 1.5 degrees alive, but the pulse is weak. It's only going to survive if we keep our promises and we translate our commitments into rapid action. So it's an acknowledgement of what was achieved, but it's also a warning that we cannot let this fall past, because the work is only now starting. The Paris Agreement is only now coming into effect. So what can we do from here? And so for youth, I think that looks like bringing our knowledges to the table. I've been talking about revolutionary hope as the idea that of believing that the world can look like something different, And if you've ever played a video game, my favorite part of video games is that the rules of that world are different than the rules of the world I live in now. Like in a video game, I could do a backflip, but in this world, I can't do a backflip. And when we create those different rules for the world, that's a world building experience. And that's something that youth are really good at, is believing that things could look different than they are right now. And we have to be able to envision a different world to bring it into effect. And we can use our different skills to make a difference. You know, there were a bunch of different youth who participated in the LWF delegation. We didn't use our skills in the same way, but we were stronger because we had all of that diversity of experience. So for youth who are on the call today, the way that you're going to use your skills is going to look different than the way that I use mine. And we're all going to be stronger for us having all of that different way of contributing. And another thing I think that youth bring to the table is this accountability for our futures and for the next generations. So like, I know there's a couple of youth on the call today who are around my age. I was born in 1997, I'm 24. Maybe there's some people who's even a little bit younger than me. Some of us could live to 2100. They're talking about 2100 like it's far in the future. But if I eat right and I do some jogging, maybe I can live to 103. So maybe I'll be there. Maybe I'll be there in 2100 when they say that all the glaciers might have melted away. And maybe I'll be there when people who rely on glaciers for their sole source of drinking water are asking, did you know? Did you know that the glaciers were going to be gone? What did you do about it? You knew, you were there. So if we're going to be there, if we're going to try and hope to be there, God willing, like we want to know that we did our best. We want to know we did our best for future generations. And the last thing that I think for youth is we don't want to let the perfect stand in the way of the good. We're going to do the best we can. It's not always going to be perfect. I don't have all the answers, but just because we don't know what the perfect answer is, doesn't mean that we don't know how to do a good job. Like I'm at best a sinner saint, and I'm going to make mistakes, but we can make mistakes and be forgiven for them. So when you're thinking about joining the climate movement, also allow yourself a little bit of freedom to not have all the answers right away, because even the best scientists in the whole world, they don't know what to do. Even the best politicians in the whole world, they've been doing this for 30 years and they're still confused too. We're all figuring it out together, and we're figuring it out in relationship with each other. And that's, I think, where the church comes into play, is that we have these, through the church, we have these important spaces for community mobilization. And it's our responsibility to lead by example, starting with our accountability at home. People look to their churches to be moral compasses, especially with things that are challenging and that are stressful, things that are hard. And so we can demonstrate that leadership by even outpacing government responses through community action, by leveraging the relationships that we've built through our faith, and by continuing to do more relationship building as active care for creation. And one of the ways that we do that is by decolonizing. It's by looking to Indigenous leaders in our communities with their knowledges of the lands that stem from time immemorial. We know we don't have all of the answers, but there are other people out there who have important knowledges to share with us, and we can listen to them, and we can uplift their voices, and we can support their sovereignty and self-determination. And that's a part of being in a good relationship with the land that we're standing on, the land that's nourishing us. So those are a couple of thoughts from me about this COP process, and thanks for listening, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. But I hope that gives a little bit of insight about both my own journey with climate justice and also at the climate conference this fall. So thank you very much.
Katarina, thank you so much. What an amazing experience, and what an amazing representative that you have been and that you are and continue to be in this work and ministry. And thank you so much for sharing some of your life and your passion for this work. We have a bit of time for some questions. So if you have any questions in particular for Kata, I would ask you just to put them in the chat, and we can have a little bit of a Q&A time here. Oh,
I saw a message in the chat that I might have I might have been sharing the wrong screen at one point. So apologies if I had a technical error. And I just want to say that you all did amazing with the Jamboard. So that's on, if that's on me, then I still think we did pretty good with the tech tonight.
Awesome. Okay, I see a couple of, there's a statement here from Karen and Hannah that nations need to make and keep promises, and we as faith people make and must keep promises for hope, sustainability, and survival. Yeah, big promises. And it has to be more than just words. It's the time for words has passed, I think. Okay. What was your biggest takeaway from COP, Kata?
One of the things that I really learned while I was at COP is just the amount of influence that non-governmental actors can have on these within these spaces and spheres, that our governments are being pushed by the actions of their citizens. Mm-hmm. And, you know, they say like 2 weeks of the year is COP, but the other 50 weeks of the year is when the real work happens. And that's when it matters that people have their feet on the ground, that they're out doing this work, that they're out living within their values, and loving the land, and actively loving the land is climate action. Mm-hmm. And so I think that was something that really stood out to me, was just the amount of influence in that respect that individuals can have. But the other side of that is also that I was reminded that there is someone who is always profiting off of someone else's suffering. So this is not a passive process of climate change. Climate change is not a passive consequence. It is something that is actively being caused by the actions of people who are profiting off of causing lasting damage to other people and places. And we as an international community have to decide how much loss we're willing to accept. Mm-hmm. Because when we were sitting there in those meetings, you know, there would be countries like Canada saying, you know, we just can't stop extracting oil, that we just can't stop. And then other countries would say, you know, you can say that, and you're signing our demise. Like our country is 2 meters above sea level. So you can say that, and you can delay, and you can drag your feet, but look me in the eyes and know that that's what you're doing to my people. So that was really powerful. And I think that's really important to have these meetings, because it's one of the only spheres where people with all of these different perspectives have to look each other in the eyes and acknowledge that.
Yeah. Yeah. Bishop Susan asks if the LWF COP group is still in contact, and if you have any goals for moving forward.
Yeah, we're still in contact. Just on Sunday, we were talking for 3 hours. Not even because we were having a meeting. We had a 1-hour meeting. We stayed talking to each other for 2 more hours because we like each other's company. So yeah, we're still in contact. Us youth are still getting together. Nathan and Becky and I are still drinking coffee. And mm-hmm. even it might be interesting, Christy, if we have a minute, to hear if Nathan has any thoughts that he'd like to share, seeing as he's tuning in all the way from Brazil.
Sure.
So, hello everyone. Can you hear me well? Yeah. So it's really nice to be here with you and to hear from you again, Kata. I was just chatting with your mom. She asked if I connected with your presentation, and I did. And I think one thing that was really great about COP was being with all the youth who were there and learning from their experiences and from what they lived in back home. So it was it was about fighting for climate justice. It was about caring for creation, but it was also about connecting with people and learning from people. So yeah, I think that's what I have to share. I didn't prepare anything. I'm here to hear from you.
Thank you, Nathan. Kata, what has been important for you in terms of being a young person and finding and using your voice in this kind of forum?
Well, one of the things that we've been talking about when it comes to finding and using our voice is connecting back with all of the people who are a part of our journey. I think it's important for me to acknowledge that, like, my voice isn't just my own. Like, I'm a product of my community and I have a responsibility to my community. So when I'm finding my voice, I look to the people around me who are such important parts of who I am. So that was something I really tried to do when I was preparing for the COP, was, so what are all of these different elements of who I am and what I could bring to the table? So I'm a young person, so we attended meetings from the Youth and Children's Organization of the United Nations, YOUNGO. And I'm a Canadian, so I attended meetings from the Climate Action Network Canada about how Canadian NGOs were trying to push our government into more ambitious climate action. And I'm a Northerner, so I attended meetings and events from the Inuit Circumpolar Council, and connected with people with that way as well. And I live in Southern Ontario and I live in the Northwest Territories, which is how I ended up bringing that youth statement from the Western Arctic and those children's statements from a school in Etobicoke. So I think that's something that's important to me, because when I reflect on my accountability, I also don't have to be so nervous, because I know that I'm not only sharing my own opinions, but I'm bringing forward something that's been said again and again throughout my community. So then I don't have to be too shy to tell you what I think, because it's not just me, it's all of these other people who are part of the same communities with me. And part of that is the church. So, you know, preparing for the COP, I talked to Stephen Larson, I talked to Christy, I talked to Yaya, I prayed a lot. We were always praying. Prayed before I got on the plane, prayed before I gave my talk, prayed before the first one of us left to go back home. That was really important in our journey. And that also helps us to feel like we're not by ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. Bishop Susan says, how would you like to challenge our church?
That's a good question. And I also did see as well, I don't know, did you already ask me this one from Tanya about how to get involved in the youth online?
Yeah, I sent her a message with my contact information. So yeah.
Nice. Okay. Cool. Okay. So how to challenge our church? I would challenge our church to be more ambitious than the Canadian government. I think that is something that that we could easily do. I think that's something that our faith calls us to do. And one of the ways that we can do that is by being more ambitious than they were with their nationally determined contribution. So when you read the nationally determined contribution that Canada made, Canada has committed to becoming net zero for carbon emissions by 2050. And actually, developed nations were asked by the United Nations to commit to being carbon neutral or net zero carbon emissions by 2040. So we as a country are not being as ambitious as we're asked to be. Developed nations were asked to reduce their emissions more and faster, to give developing nations that have less resources, to give them more time so that they can build their economies, they can support their population before they have to make this transition. But we're not really taking, as a country, Canada isn't taking up the mantle to do that in the time frame that was asked. And so as a church, the ELCIC is working on becoming net zero carbon emissions by 2050, which is matching the ambition of the Canadian government. And I would say that we could try and be a bit more ambitious. I think we could try and hit that 2040 deadline. And that would be a challenge to the Canadian government to look around and say, well, other people are doing it. Other people are coming up with plans for how to do it. And maybe we should be thinking about that as well. Because we're going to need countries, especially countries like Canada. Canada is one of the highest per capita emitters of greenhouse gases in the world. And what that means is that we're contributing per person more than our share of greenhouse gases and more than almost any other country in the world per person. And is that because we as individuals are using so much more resources than others? Maybe to an extent, but it's also because so much of our Canadian economy is based on extraction. That is historically how the Canadian government has focused our economy, is through a lens of colonial capitalism that removes Indigenous people from the land and then removes the resources from that land and then extracts both resources and labor from the citizens to access those resources, which we then sell to other countries. So I think that we should focus on greater ambition, especially as a nation that does a lot of resource extraction, and especially when we're trying to lead faithfully in that context.
Yeah, that's a great answer and a great challenge. Tanya had asked, what does climate change look like for people with disabilities?
That is a great question.
Great question.
If you remember from the summer when there was the heat wave in BC, one of the things that we were seeing disproportionate impacts of climate change on people who have disabilities, people who are elderly, people who have reduced mobility, people who have heightened environmental sensitivities. So think of someone who has respiratory difficulties might struggle more with breathing if there's increased wildfires. So I would say that there are disproportionate impacts on people who have disabilities. And also people who have disabilities are underrepresented in the conversations about addressing climate change because a lot of spaces are made inaccessible. And that is something that's worth saying about the COP as well, is that while there was the intention there for the space to be accessible, the space was not without bias. There was bias in who could travel internationally in the midst of a global pandemic. There was reduced access to that space for people who have pre-existing health conditions, people who are immunocompromised. That physical space is not the most accessible to people who have reduced mobility. So I think it's important for us to remember in these conversations whose voices are being reflected and whose voices are not being reflected to an appropriate degree. And this was a real problem of this COP because of the context of the pandemic and because of the way that travel restrictions were imposed in the midst of the pandemic as well. There were a lot of missing voices.
And I think vaccine equity would come into that as well, limiting people's ability to travel if they hadn't had an access to a vaccine as well. Yeah.
Yes, and it was something that came up within the COP was how are we as a global community addressing global equity when in the midst of a pandemic we couldn't we couldn't change or challenge patent laws to make vaccines more accessible within the global community. What are the rippling effects of the way that we're choosing to handle this global consequence of challenge? And what does that mean when we think about something like climate change that is long lasting, that is not super concrete, and that impacts so many different elements of our daily lives?
Yeah. Excellent thoughts. Karen and Hannah write, can we as a church reposition how we hear from our companion partners? Perhaps they could teach us about climate realities where they are, and we could hear how their intergenerational church people are hurting and also acting for change.
I wonder if Christy or maybe Karen or Hannah could clarify what they mean by companion partners.
Is the microphone open?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, across the church, one of the benefits of who we are is that we are connected to people all over the world. We have current relationships, and our conversations across the world could be strengthened even more if we used their local knowledge of their land and their climate pain, and also their climate resilience and their climate action stories in those other 50 weeks of the year and in those other occasions when we don't gather. So you described, Katarina, the power of knowing people in your own community, but I would say in the climate conversation, another real benefit is hearing from somebody somewhere else entirely in the globe where you can't imagine what life is like for them. And then the stories that they tell are peopled. So it's easier to care about the rainforest or the Amazon when you know Nathan in Brazil. And it's easier for Nathan to imagine minus 30 degrees or minus 50 degrees in a Canadian winter when he knows a kata. So companion partners for the Eastern Synod include Guyana, which includes the Amazon, and the Church of Jordan and the Holy Land, which has such a hot climate that between our three organizations alone, we would have 3 major climates and relationships of trust where possibly the youth of those areas could have some really good and interesting connected conversations.
That sounds like a great idea.
Perfect.
Sounds great. Let's do that. And if you're interested to hear a little bit more from a couple of different perspectives and perspectives we might not hear often, we can also look to the LWF Voices of the Communion series, where they've been featuring Kulakani from South Africa, who is one of our LWF youth delegates, was recently featured. Bishop Susan was also recently featured, and I can see that her hand is raised here. So maybe she has something great to add to the conversation as well.
I was just on a Zoom call today with our partner church, national partner church, and also the BC's partner in Peru. And they want to change. We have been supporting them in a project in the Amazon for a number of years, but they want to change the focus to be one looking at climate justice. And they had a very elaborate proposal about training groups to learn their context, network with other groups, and do advocacy. And it was just amazing to think of. So yeah, there is a church that would be very interested in, and I think sharing resources, language being a bit of a challenge, but it translates.
We can learn.
Yeah, exactly. All right.
No problem. Thank you. Okay, I'm cognizant of our time this evening. Does anybody have any final questions for Katarina before we move into our sending? Okay. Oh, Christina has her hand up. Hi, friend.
Hi. My question is there, and I mean this as a question, is there a too young or a too old, and I think too old is easier to imagine, but is there a too young to start like high level conversations about climate change? Like, is this a Sunday school conversation that we could be having differently? As a climate scientist, what do you think about that?
Well, someone very smart named Christina once said to me that if you really understand your research, you should be able to explain it like a children's book, like a picture book. And if you can't simplify it into something that would be like a children's book, you probably don't understand your research good enough. And that really stuck with me. I really think about that a lot because we shouldn't be talking about things that impact all of us in a way that makes it so that we can't all understand. I don't think that that's quite correct. Something that the United Nations does is that they get a group of scientists together and to create these big reports about climate science, about projections and modeling for what we expect to happen with climate change. Those IPCC reports come out every 5 years, and they have like some of the most well-researched and updated information, but then we have to translate it into stuff that makes sense to us. And I think that there's no such thing as too young, because something that is believed where I live is that like the kids are close to the earth. The kids are close to the earth. They have those knowledges, they have something to share, they have a way to lead us. And even those little first graders, 6 years old, who wrote those cards that I brought with me to COP, like I would hand their statements to politicians and they would say, you know, for me, this really cuts through because it's so clear, it's so honest, it's not full of pretensions or other motivations. It's just that the kids want to live in a good earth. The kids want to breathe a good air. They have knowledges to share with us. So I think just bringing into the conversation these big issues in a way that they can understand, and also that it doesn't overwhelm them. I think when we talk about climate grief, we're talking about love for the planet that is hurt by thinking about the ways that the earth is being damaged. So centering those conversations with kids in love, I think that's a great way to bring them into the conversation. And then I don't think that there's anything as too old either, because I think we really have to look to our elders for that that lifelong information. They have knowledges of what Earth looked like a long time ago and how it's changed, and lived experience of that change, and even things that someone young like me might never have thought of. I read the other day that the first grocery store showed up in the US in 1946. I was like, what happened before grocery stores? And then I was like, oh, well, like they had farmers markets, they had more farmers, they had different ways of relating to their food than what I'm used to now. So I don't think there's anything such as too old or too young. This is an intergenerational issue, and we need everybody's knowledges.
Tanya was wondering about some promotional material for is it February 17th or February 19th?
I believe it's the 19th.
The 19th? Okay. Any of the, there's Paul. I assume that there will be promotional information coming out about that. So we will share that across our networks and socials and all that kind of stuff. And Tanya, yes, we will. We can certainly, the conversation tonight has been recorded, so it'll be available on both the Synod website and the Yaya website as well. Any last questions tonight? Okay, I'm going to share, this is a prayer that I've written and kind of adapted from, part of it comes from J. Philip Newell in his book, Celtic Benediction, Morning and Night Prayer. So let us pray. Gracious and loving God, you have blessed us with this time and space to be together and to learn. We are grateful for this opportunity to know more about the land we co-inhabit, and we ask that you would help us to both use our own voices and help lift up the voices of those around us, so that together we may work towards awareness and change. Thank you for Katarina, and please continue to bless her in her life and work, that she may continue as a partner for advocacy, hope, and justice. And loving God, guide us further into this night, into the inner universe of our souls, ever opening inwards, light upon light, new depth after new depth. Guide us through places that feel strange and fearful towards the place of your eternal dwelling, and assure us again that as you draw close to us, we also draw closer to the heart of every living being, and indeed, the very heart of all life. Bless us this day and this night always. Amen. Thank you so much, friends. It was a delight to be here tonight. And thank you again, Katarina, for your, you know your stuff because you explain it so well. So thank you. Thank you, thank you. And it was so good to see you.
Well, thank you for having me, and nice to see everyone's faces. And thank you all for listening. Thanks as well for supporting me in the journey, because so many of you have had such a big part in my journey, and those of you I'm meeting tonight, I'm sure we'll be connected more in the future. And it is good to be doing good work in good company.
Yeah, it's the best. Thank you, friends. Take care and good night. Bye.